collect the crumbs and wonder how their lives could have come to this. They have lost just about everything, and that includes their dignity. What many of them told me today is that all they've done is exchange one kind of hell in Kosovo for another here across the border. Amid the chaos, there are some who are lost, separated from their families, while others are reunited with loved ones they feared might have been murdered by Serbian death squads. Still, the refugees stream in here. The Serbs are herding them like cattle onto these trains, the mass expulsion of a people. This baby was born just 1 hour before his family were driven out. They, like other refugees, forced into railway carriages so crowded they could hardly breathe.
They knock on our doors, and we open the door when we've seen people with masks. They said, you have exactly 10 minutes to get ready and get the hell out of here.
It's the most humiliating thing that could happen to a human being expelled from its own land. How is it like? It's Schindler's List. Whoever saw the movie, it's exactly that feeling.
The Macedonians are trying to hold back this surging tide of refugees. They say their small and newly independent country cannot cope with such an influx, that the stability of their nation is under threat. All of this was bad enough today, but just when it seemed things could get no worse, the heavens opened, drenching those who are already cold and exhausted and with next to nothing to protect them from the elements.
As you can see, it's now started pouring with rain onto this field of human misery, compounding the plight of the refugees here. Some of them are sick and some of them are dying. They have precious little shelter, precious little food, and what they all keep asking me is why can't the world do more to help them? Ben Brown, BBC News on the Macedonia-Kosovo border.
Well, our correspondent Paul Wood is in the Macedonian capital, Skopje, and he says that some aid is arriving, but the situation is now critical.
There's an aid operation urgently, and thought needs to be given to the longer-term settlement of these refugees and the feeding of them for who knows how long over the summer, perhaps into next year. But the situation as we speak is absolutely critical. People are in a terrible condition, not being allowed to move off the border, no shelter and very, very little food.
What is the Macedonian government saying? Because they're not actually letting these people in, are they?
Well, Macedonians are angry, first of all, about what they perceive to be a very slow international response. One of the Macedonian government ministers said, quote, Brussels is closed over the weekend, implying that the time for decisions and action is now and not next week when the European Union comes back off holiday and ministers meet. Others have reacted angrily to suggestions that they're not doing enough. A Swedish journalist asked the question of a minister, why were babies and old people dying on the border? The minister banged the table and said, why doesn't Sweden send 100 planes to Macedonia and take these people away? So there's a feeling they've been left to cope with it on their own, but also underneath this, the ethnic tensions in Macedonia, I think, are finding expressions in the orders to Macedonian police who are Orthodox, who are Slav, try to slow the inflow of these people. The Slav Macedonians were never keen on seeing ethnic Albanians come over the border in large numbers, and they're trying to prevent it.
Could the Macedonians not do more to let the most desperately needy through?
Well, this is the question that aid workers are asking again and again. There's a lot of anger here among international staff about the way these refugees are being hemmed in by the police and not allowed to move. One charity I spoke to, a British charity, Children's Aid, is in fact leaving Macedonia altogether because of what it says is official obstruction. It's taking 35,000 pre-prepared meals, which are needed desperately today, on a 2-day journey to northern Albania because it feels it has no hope of getting these meals to where they're needed in Macedonia.
Paul Wood in Skopje, and we hope to be speaking to our correspondent George Alagaya, who's in Albania, where up to 100,000 refugees have crossed the border there later in the programme.
Belgrade in flames as NATO steps up the air war on Yugoslavia.
Cruise missiles strike at the very heart of the Milosevic regime.
Serb authorities say innocent victims were put in danger.
Good morning, you're watching Sunrise on Sky News. It's Saturday the 3rd of April.
We've continuing coverage of the crisis in Kosovo. The main developments this morning. For the first time, Belgrade has become the target of NATO's firepower. 2 government ministries in the centre of the Yugoslavian capital were hit in the early hours of this morning. Worst hit was the Interior Ministry, the centre of power for police forces, accused by the West of atrocities against Kosovo's ethnic Albanians. It stands practically next door to Belgrade's main hospital, the maternity unit.
Government ministers have already been to see for themselves the damage caused by the NATO attack. Vuk Draskovic, the Yugoslav deputy prime minister, told Sky News the missile attack was no different from the Nazi bombing of Belgrade during the Second World War.
Macedonia and Albania have warned they can no longer cope with the flood of refugees from Kosovo. Along with Montenegro, the Balkan states have taken in more than 250,000 Kosovans since NATO action began on March the 24th.
Our main news this morning, NATO has raised the stakes in its bombardment of Yugoslavia. For the first time since the conflict began, cruise missiles launched from warships in the Adriatic struck at the very heart of the Serbian regime. The action was immediately condemned by the Yugoslav authorities. Sky's Tim Marshall witnessed firsthand last night's dramatic explosions in Belgrade.
NATO brought the war to the heart of the power structure. The blow to the Serbian and Yugoslav interior ministries and to the psychology of the Milosevic government. These buildings are where the operations by the police and special forces in Kosovo have been masterminded from. They were first on the list of targets inside the capital. There are more.
This is just another example of NATO steadily extending the scope of targets and the intensity of our air campaign, and also giving the message that no part of the Yugoslav military machine is exempted from this air campaign. There is no sanctuary, no immunity.
The missile struck just before 1 a.m. local time. The emergency services were on the scene within minutes. There seemed little they could do. This was a direct hit. The ministry smashed, in flames, and surely totally out of action. The official reaction was one of fury, parallels drawn with the Nazi bombardment of Belgrade in World War II.
The last time Belgrade was in fire, in Easter Day, was in April 1941, when Hitler bombed Belgrade. I think no difference.
The Serbian Minister of Interior, Vleko Stojilkovic, came to see the situation. The ministries are close to a maternity hospital. Mothers and babies were rushed to shelters. With the situation so confused, details on damage and casualties at the ministry were difficult to establish. Dawn showed just how powerful the blasts were. It's clear the ministries are out of action. Their functions, though, will be carried out from elsewhere. The people of the capital will gather to see this symbol of government power, and they will probably again rally around the government. They'll also wonder, what next? Tim Marshall, Sky News, Belgrade.
As each hour passes, thousands more refugees join the exodus from Kosovo. Conditions along the border with Macedonia are increasingly desperate. The numbers arriving are so great that the authorities say there's a real threat to public order. Our correspondent Keith Graves has just sent this report on the growing human catastrophe.
It was bad enough before, but overnight conditions have worsened considerably. The media and most aid workers have been banned from the impromptu camp a few yards inside the border, but one aid worker said that 11 people had died during the hours of darkness. Certainly, amongst the 25,000 people now thought to be trapped in the muddy field, caught between the Serbs who threaten to kill them if they return, and the Macedonian soldiers whose government doesn't want them here, hypothermia and hunger are starting to take their toll. At one point, soon after dawn, the sound of explosions from the Serb side of the border and the sight of a Serbian patrol on a ridge above the camp started a chant of NATO, NATO from those inside. Some who are being processed and leaving say that they expect NATO to stop the purge of Albanians from Kosovo and to help those who've already been thrown out. Some of these people have been here in the mud and the rain and the cold and the sewage for up to 4 days. Babies are being born and people are dying in conditions that are inhuman. Little aid is getting to them. 2 medical tents are totally inadequate. Once the sick have been treated, they're sent back into the squalor by the Macedonian security men. 500 yards away is a tent filled with bread. It's not reaching the camp. Aid workers blame the Macedonian authorities, who are far from cooperative, They blame NATO for inflicting upon them this humanitarian disaster, and meanwhile the victims of that disaster simply try to exist from hour to hour. Keith Graves, Sky News on the Kosovo-Macedonian border.
And joining us in the studio is Director of Christian Aid, Dr. Dalip Mukherjee. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
We saw those shocking pictures there in Macedonia of the refugee camps. Has it surprised agencies like yours at the numbers, sheer numbers coming through?
Well, all agencies were totally unprepared, as were the governments of Macedonia, Albania, and I think NATO itself, of the size of the problem, the urgency of the problem, and the shock of what has all happened, both in Kosovo and in the countries around.
Should they have been shocked? We knew people would leave. You just mean you didn't think
I think it's happened much
so
faster
many.
than we could expect, and the context in which it's happening. The people are under the elements, children and mothers and old people are starving and are about to die. Health conditions are hopeless, water is inadequate, and the governments have neither the infrastructure nor the resources to get on with the job and do it well.
Well, how soon can we improve things? Today we've been having hour-by-hour reports from our correspondents in these fields with thousands of refugees. They say it's getting worse. Troops are helping, though, in some areas.
Christian Aid has 3 staff out there and working with local charities and partners and with churches through the Alliance of Churches Together. We are trying to find out what the local situation is. We are working together with the Disasters Emergency Committee. We're going to go on a big appeal from Tuesday. We've got staff out there to assess the local situation. We're working with the government. We're working with international agencies. But I think we've got to put our act together. We've got to avoid duplication. We've got to get adequate supplies in the right place, in the right time. We sent out a plane with supplies from Copenhagen just a day ago, and hopefully this will help. But the short term is getting the supply in the right place. What's the medium term and long term issue? I think that's the question we need to ask together.
Yes, certainly in the short term we've seen pictures of some aid actually a few hundred yards from people who need it and no one there to distribute it.
Well, that's why we were not ready for this. We were just totally overwhelmed, as were the local infrastructure and facilities. We are getting onto the job. Our partners and friends are doing something about it. People are coming in by their thousands, and we hear from the stories over here. There are lines of people ready to go through the borders. The question is, how do we get them into shelter? Where do we organize this? Where do we put up the tent camps? Where do we get the water supply from? So we're working with governments, we're working with partners, and working with others to see what's best and how we can help the local situation.
And very, very briefly, of course, people at home can help by supporting you.
We're asking for support. All the agencies are asking for funds and supplies. We're asking for people right across Europe, right across the world, to put their act together and say, at this time, let's see what we can do to help the people in Kosovo and those coming out of it.
Dr. Mukherjee, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thousands of ethnic Albanians who sought refuge in Montenegro are on the move again. Fears of an impending civil war and ethnic cleansing are sweeping the country. The refugees and some frightened locals are making their way to Albania, which is already groaning under the weight of those displaced by the conflict. Sky's correspondent Arnoud van Linden has witnessed the Kosovars' search for a safe haven.
For days they've been streaming into Montenegro, but now there's a dual exodus out again. These are ethnic Albanians from Peć in western Kosovo, who after their brutal eviction are afraid to remain in any part of Yugoslavia. Montenegro, ruled by a government opposed to Slobodan Milosevic, welcomed them in. But these people don't believe the junior partner in the federation is a safe haven, and now cross the border into Albania, adding to the huge mass of refugees who've already descended on Europe's most impoverished state. Not far from the frontier crossing at Bozai, others are fleeing too. Hundreds of people clamouring at the central bus station of the Montenegrin capital for a ticket out. These people aren't Kosovar refugees, they're Montenegrins, but most are members of the Muslim minority, and they're heading for Sarajevo. There's an almost cruel irony to it all. Not so long ago, the Bosnian capital was the most dangerous place on earth. Now it's become a sanctuary. Amongst the men packing their mothers, wives and children onto the buses is Dino. Fear has driven him to do so. Fear that Slobodan Milosevic will use his army to regain political control here, and then ethnically cleanse it too. I'm sending them to Bosnia, Dino says, so that if there is a civil war here in Montenegro, someone in my family will survive.
And
with the rumours of impending civil war multiplying day by day, thousands more are likely to take the same road out. Anat van Linden, Sky News, Montenegro.
Now we're receiving pictures from RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. These are live pictures, as you can see there. The early morning fog and mist hasn't yet lifted, and activity, as it were, on the runway there. We can tell you that the B-1B bombers are being loaded up, and we will obviously keep you updated as to the activities. We understand there could be some missions this evening. Obviously the plans for attack vary each day, and we will be trying to find out more details about how many aircrafts will be leaving and when.
Good morning to you.
Morning.
You've seen obviously the pictures of Belgrade in flames. What impact will this have on your people? Is this productive or counterproductive, do you think?
I think it start giving much hope to the Albanians, especially those refugees who left Pristina. So it's a first sign that NATO start to hit hard in the heart of Belgrade regime. We are sorry if there are some collateral damage, but I think Milosevic regime must feel hit exactly where they are.
It does seem that Mr. Milosevic is quite happy to see whatever destruction of his city is necessary. He's not a man to back down easily. Do you think this will have any more impact?
I think he is a man. He can sacrifice all his nation just for his power. But I think that NATO will not stop, at least until now. They're going very clear with just small collateral damage. Milosevic will collapse very soon.
Do you think there's a possibility that his forces in Kosovo might increase the scale of their activities in response to NATO's build-up?
Only yesterday we have 3 big massacres in 3 different places in Kosovo. One in the north, in village of Bajgora, when was hit by the Yugoslav jets. A school full of refugees was hit. Been 11 killed and about 20-25 people badly wounded. In south, in Rahovec, found 70 bodies, and in Dranica, same 70 bodies from different villages. We have a list of the names. So he will try to do anything, but Albanian peoples are ready to really sacrifice, and we have to get rid of this tyranny. That's it.
Thank you very much indeed, Plira Sadu from the LPK. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yellow ribbons.
Operations by the police and special forces in Kosovo have been masterminded from. They were first on the list of targets inside the capital. There are more.
This is just another example of NATO steadily extending the scope of targets and the intensity of our air campaign, and also giving the message that no part of the Yugoslav military machine is exempted from this air campaign. There is no sanctuary, no immunity.
The missile struck just before 1 a.m. local time. The emergency services were on the scene within minutes. There seemed little they could do. This was a direct hit. The ministry smashed, in flames, and surely totally out of action. The official reaction was one of fury, parallels drawn with the Nazi bombardment of Belgrade in World War II.
The last time Belgrade was in fire, in Easter days, was in April 1941, when Hitler bombed Belgrade. I think no difference.
The Serbian Minister of Interior, Vleko Stojilkovic, came to see the situation. The ministries are close to a maternity hospital. Mothers and babies were rushed to shelters. With the situation so confused, details on damage and casualties at the ministry were difficult to establish. Dawn showed just how powerful the blasts were. It's clear the ministries are out of action. Their functions, though, will be carried out from elsewhere. The people of the capital will gather to see this symbol of government power, and they will probably again rally around the government. They'll also wonder, what next? Tim Marshall, Sky News, Belgrade.
Ridge above the camp.
probably a calculated display intended to further intimidate the refugees. Some of them have been out in the open now for 4 days. Human beings are being born here and they are dying here. 2 small medical tents just can't cope with the sick, and even when they are treated, they're immediately sent back into the squalor, where there's a real danger of disease taking hold to join the hypothermia and hunger.
Whatever may be being said elsewhere, the right sort of aid and enough of it is not getting through to these people. Unofficially, the aid agencies blame the Macedonian government for not being cooperative enough. The Macedonian government blames NATO for inflicting this upon them. And meanwhile, these people are existing in conditions that are not fit for a pig. Keith Graves, Sky News on the Kosovo-Macedonian border.
And Keith is on the line now from Blaché on the border.
The problem of moving thousands of refugees away from the border is intensifying. A scramble for places on trucks moving out of Kukas, an indication of the desperation these people feel to get as far away from Kosovo as possible. But the aid agencies are struggling. There's no shelter and little food. Unless there's a concerted effort to get aid into Kukas, the town seems in danger of sinking under the sheer weight of people.
He said we are in a very difficult position, and because from the number of refugees that arrive in the city, they are in a lack of, especially starting with bread and other food supplies, and they are very close to a catastrophic position.
Just a few hundred yards from the border crossing, Serb soldiers strengthen their positions. It's the last thing these refugees see as they leave their homeland, apart from the rifle butts and fists of the Serb police. Minutes before arriving in Albania, they are beaten again.
There is no more possibilities to live in the same state with Serbia.
Still they come, pouring through the border, but to an uncertain future. The Albanians have made an almighty effort to look after these people, but now they desperately need help from the outside before refugees start dying in large numbers, not from Serb guns and artillery, but from hunger and disease. Ross Appleyard, Sky News on the Kosovo-Albanian border.
It's believed that 2 Australian aid workers are being held by Serb authorities in Yugoslavia. The Australian government has appealed to the Yugoslav government to release Stephen Pratt and Peter Wallace. The pair were working for the aid agency Care Australia when they went missing 3 days ago. Meanwhile, in Brisbane, about 1,000 Australian Serb residents staged a protest outside Parliament House denouncing NATO bombs. Well, other news now. Tony.
Good morning, Christian Aid. My name's Jo. How can I help you?
The phones have started ringing at aid centres around the UK. 400 donations were made at this Bristol centre yesterday, 150 by 11 o'clock this morning. Despite the images of a flood of human misery, the reaction here has been slow. But once advertisements are televised from Tuesday, aid agencies are hoping British people will open their hearts and wallets.
Every time there's an ad that goes out on the radio, we have a bit of a flush of responses from people, but it's been slow and steady all day today and yesterday.
The UNHCR positioned dumps of supplies in Albania, Macedonia and Montenegro in advance, but the crush of desperate people who converged on camps like these simply swamped aid workers. In sprawling cities without walls, exhausted exiles, some of whom have walked for days to reach these borders, are dying.
We were not ready for that we are experiencing in and around Kosovo. Yesterday, 130,000 refugees were added to the list of those leaving Kosovo into neighbouring countries. This brings to a total of 765,000 the number of displaced people since the current upsurge in fighting in March of last year. In fact, over the past 10 days, about 290,000 people have been forcibly expelled from Kosovo. Yesterday, 55,000 entered Albania, 55,000 entered the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Only towards Montenegro was the flow somewhat reduced. Only 1,000 refugees entered Montenegro yesterday. We currently estimate that between 200 and 300,000 people are moving towards the borders, seeking refuge in the neighboring countries. In fact, if you wanted to do a kind of back-of-the-envelope mathematical calculation, at this rate, the Serb security forces would have more or less emptied Kosovo in between 10 to 20 days from now. Now, NATO is obviously extremely concerned, even that would be an understatement, by the proportions of this refugee and humanitarian crisis. The Secretary General spoke in the middle of the night to President Gligorov of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, assuring him that NATO is going to do all in its power to assist that country to meet the challenge of being able to provide and care for so many refugees. He has been speaking to the Prime Minister of Albania earlier today. He's also been on the phone to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan, and also to Madame Ogata, the head of the UNHCR in Geneva. We have sent now a military liaison team to the UNHCR in Geneva to supplement the civilian NATO team that is already there and to help coordinate the cooperation, the effort of NATO to help the UNHCR. And today, the North Atlantic Council meeting here has taken two further decisions with immediate effect. Firstly, the Council has directed the head of the NATO forces in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Lieutenant General Sir Michael Jackson, to direct his forces to assist the government and the relief organizations to cope with the inflow of refugees. In other words, all of these forces, all of these NATO forces in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia have now been put under the operational control of General Jackson, and he has full authority from NATO to use those forces in any way he likes to assist with the refugee crisis.